Jessica Pegula is American. She was playing at the Miami Open. She was in the semifinals. She lives in South Florida. And she looked around a stadium in her own state, in her own country, at a tournament she had every reason to feel at home in, and the entire place was screaming for somebody else. She said it herself this week, looking back on it. She was confused, not annoyed. Confused. She could not work out where all of those people had come from. Now here is the detail that makes that story genuinely strange. The player they were screaming for was ranked around number 140 in the world. She had come through qualifying, which is the part of the tournament nobody watches, played on the outside courts in front of nobody. She was 19 years old. She had never won a WTA title in her life. She still has not. Not one. 16 months later, and yet this week in Washington, D.C., a city 8,500 miles from Manila, the William H.G. Fitzgerald Tennis Center was packed to capacity for her, with the Philippine flag hanging off the railings, draped over shoulders, painted on faces. On day one, before she had beaten a single opponent, American reporters were already calling hers the loudest crowd of the entire tournament. Same thing in Berlin. Same thing in Stuttgart. Same thing at Wimbledon. So let me ask you Jessica Pegula's question, except I want you to take it seriously, because I do not think anybody actually has. Where are these people coming from? Not as a compliment, not as a nice line about passionate fans, as a real question with a real answer. Because somewhere between 10,000 and 20,000 human beings have shown up in 4 different countries over 16 months for a 21-year-old with 0 titles, and they are doing something inside those stadiums that tennis crowds do not do anywhere else on earth. There is an explanation. It is specific, and it has almost nothing to do with tennis. Once you see it, you are not going to be able to look at a WTA draw the same way again, and neither, I suspect, will the people who run the tour. Because the thing Pegula was looking at that afternoon in Miami was not a fan base. It was something the sport does not have a word for yet. Let me tell you who she is, fast, because you need it for the rest of this. Alex Eala, 21 years old, Filipina. Right now, she is the highest-ranked Filipino player in the history of the WTA Tour, which sounds impressive until you learn how low that bar was, and then it sounds almost impossible. Last month at Wimbledon, she became the first player from the Philippines in the Open era to reach the 4th round of a Grand Slam. She got there by beating Iga Swiatek, the defending champion. This week in Washington, she took out an Olympic gold medalist, the defending champion of the tournament, the world number 10, and Naomi Osaka, unseeded. So yes, she is very good. That is not the mystery. The mystery is the crowd. And here is why Pegula's confusion is legitimate rather than rude. It was not a Miami thing. It happened again in Berlin. It happened in Stuttgart. It happened at Wimbledon, at the most etiquette-obsessed tennis venue on the planet. And it happened this week in Washington, where the DC Open sold out, and a huge portion of a capacity crowd in Rock Creek Park was waving 3 stars and a sun. 3 continents. The same flag, the same chant, the same section of the stadium. Now, here is the part that turns this from a nice story into a serious one. Umpires have had to intervene. Repeatedly. In Washington, during her matches, the crowd kept cheering while players were already set to serve, and the chair had to quiet them down. That is not a detail. In tennis, that basically does not happen. Tennis crowds are trained. They know the rules better than the rules know themselves. Not this one. And I want you to think about what a crowd like that is actually worth, because this is where most coverage stops and calls it heartwarming. Professional tennis runs on 2 things: tickets sold and television markets. That is it. That is the whole economy. Tournaments live or die on whether people show up and whether broadcasters want the rights. Rankings matter to players. Attendance matters to the business. So when a woman ranked 29th in the world, with no titles, walks into an American tournament and produces the loudest, fullest, most flag-heavy crowd on the grounds, that player is worth dramatically more than her ranking says she is worth. That is not a human interest story. That is a line on a balance sheet. And she carries all of it every single match at 21. Think about what that actually feels like. Nobody else ranked in the 20s has to walk on court knowing that families drove in from 3 states, that people took the day off work, that there are grandparents in that stand who have never watched a tennis match in their lives and are only there because of you. Eala has said herself that when you feel that much love, it is hard to get used to. Hard to get used to. That is a very careful way of describing a weight. So if you are sitting there right now genuinely wanting to know the answer, that instinct is exactly why this channel exists. We do the version of the story that goes past the highlight reel. Follow now, because the explanation coming up is the part nobody else has put together, and I want you here for it. Because we now have a phenomenon that repeats across 4 countries on 3 continents for a player who has never lifted a trophy. And the harder you look at it, the less sense it makes. There are 3 specific things about this crowd that should not be possible. Start with the etiquette, because it is the strangest part. Tennis has the strictest silence rules of any major sport on earth. You do not talk during a point. You do not talk between a first serve and a second serve. You do not move in the stands until a game ends. These rules are not written on the ticket, they are absorbed. Every crowd in every country knows them, and a crowd that breaks them gets glared at by the other 4,000 people in the building. Eala's crowd chants during rallies. "Let's go, Alex, let's go." Midpoint, while the ball is in play. In Miami, in Washington, over and over, to the point where umpires have had to stop and quiet them down while the players stood there waiting. So the first question, why does this crowd, and pretty much only this crowd, break the oldest rule in the sport in 4 different countries without hesitation? Now, the geography, which is worse, Manila to Washington, D.C. is roughly 8,500 miles, Manila to Miami, similar. Manila to Berlin, Manila to London, all of it enormous. These are not cities near the Philippines. There is no short flight. There are no charter planes full of supporters. There is no organized travel package following her around the calendar the way you see with national teams. And yet the crowd is already there, not trickling in. There from day one, before she has won anything at the tournament loud enough that reporters notice it in the first round. So, the second question, where exactly are these people living, and why were they already in the building before she arrived? Now, the timing, and this is the one that really does not work. Crowds like this normally follow trophies. That is the sequence in sports. You win, then people come. You win a lot, then a lot of people come. The fandom is the reward for the results. Alex Eala has never won a WTA title. Not one. Before this week, she had reached exactly 1 final in her entire career at Eastbourne 6 weeks ago, and she lost it. She has beaten enormous names, Swiatek, Osaka, Svitolina, but the shelf is empty. There is no trophy at the end of any of it yet. So the third question, if they are not coming for the winning, what are they coming for? Hold on, because there is one single fact that explains all 3 of these at the same time, and it is not in any sports report you have read this week. We get to it in about 3 minutes, because there is a 4th thing, and it is darker than the other 3. This should have destroyed her. Understand what happens to young players who get famous early. Every other woman ranked between 25 and 35 in the world gets to lose quietly. That is one of the great mercies of that ranking. You go out in the second round on court 6 in front of 200 people and a scoreboard, and the sport forgives you by lunchtime, and you fly to the next city and nobody writes about it. Eala does not get that. When she loses in front of thousands of people who took a personal day, in front of families who drove 4 hours, in front of a country that reads about it in the morning papers before she has even landed. Every match she plays is somebody's first ever tennis match, and she knows it. Tennis is littered with talents who could not survive a fraction of that. Players who broke through at 19, got handed a nation's expectations, and were never the same. It is one of the most reliable patterns in the sport. The pressure does not build slowly. It arrives all at once, in a stadium, with your flag on it. So the fourth question, and it is the one that bothers me most. Why has this not crushed her? Now put all four together and look at the shape of it. A crowd that ignores the sport's oldest rule. A crowd that appears 8,000 miles from home before the player does. A crowd that arrived years before the first trophy. And a level of pressure that flattens most 21-year-olds sitting on a player who keeps getting better as the week goes on. Every easy explanation dies here. It is not star fandom, because stars have trophies and she does not. It is not a home crowd, because none of these cities are home. It is not a Davis Cup or Billie Jean King Cup national team thing, because she is playing individual tournaments on a professional tour and there is no country in the draw. It is not a bandwagon, because bandwagons follow winning and this one arrived early and never left. Tennis genuinely does not have a name for this, which is exactly why everybody, including Jessica Pegula, has spent 16 months describing it instead of explaining it. For the last 9 minutes, you have been assuming one thing without noticing you were doing it. You have been assuming this crowd is a result of Alex Eala, that she built it, that she went out, played well, got famous, and the people came. Flip that completely around. That crowd was already there. It was there before she was born. Here is the fact that explains all three paradoxes at the same time, and it is not a tennis fact at all. It is a demographic one. There are somewhere north of 10 million Filipinos living and working outside the Philippines right now. It is one of the largest overseas populations of any nation on Earth, built over decades of migration, and it is not scattered randomly. It is concentrated. Nurses, engineers, teachers, service workers, entire multi-generational communities clustered in specific metropolitan areas. Now look at where those clusters are. The Washington, D.C. metro area, spilling into Virginia and Maryland, South Florida, Southern California, Greater London, Toronto, Sydney, Dubai, and Abu Dhabi, Germany. Now look at the WTA calendar. Washington, Miami, Indian Wells and San Diego, Wimbledon, Toronto, Melbourne, Dubai and Abu Dhabi, Berlin and Stuttgart. Those are the same map. Nobody flew 8,500 miles. They drove 40 minutes from Virginia. That is the entire geography answer. The people Pegula could not account for in Miami were not visitors. They lived there. Many of them were born there. And once you have that, the other two paradoxes fall over immediately. The timing, they did not wait for a trophy because they were never really waiting for tennis. You cannot follow a Filipino player through the WTA rankings if there has never been one. For decades, there was simply nobody to point at. So the moment there was a name, the response was not gradual, the way fandom normally builds. It was instant, because the demand had been sitting there unmet for 60 years with nowhere to go. That is why the crowd showed up before the winning did. The crowd was not created by results. It was released by permission. And the etiquette. This is my favorite part, because everybody has this backwards. That crowd is not ignorant of tennis manners. They are importing a completely different set of them. The Philippines is a basketball country and a boxing country. Those are two of the loudest spectator cultures that exist anywhere. Continuous noise, call and response, chanting through the action, the crowd treating itself as a participant rather than an audience. They did not walk into a tennis stadium and forget the rules. They walked in carrying the only sporting culture they have ever had and applied it. Now here is the analogy that made this click for me. Every elite player has a machine behind her. Naomi Osaka has the Japanese Federation, plus American development infrastructure, plus one of the biggest commercial operations in sports. Leylah Fernandez has Tennis Canada, a program specifically engineered to produce Grand Slam finalists. Elina Svitolina came through a Ukrainian system that has been producing top 10 players for 2 decades. Zheng Qinwen came out of a state-level Chinese program. Alex Eala left Manila at 13 with a suitcase, moved to an academy on an island off the coast of Spain, and had no country behind her. There was no federation, there was no funding pipeline, there was no system because the Philippines had never needed to build one. So the country assembled itself a different way, not through an institution, through a diaspora. That crowd is not a fan club. That crowd is infrastructure. It is the thing standing in for the system she never had. It travels with her because it was already positioned everywhere she goes, and it functions the way a federation functions, except it is made of people instead of budgets. And Eala understands this more precisely than anyone. Watch the on-court interview in Washington. A reporter asks her what it feels like to be so popular everywhere she plays, and she does not answer it. She rewrites it. She says the question should be rephrased, that it should be, what is it like to be Filipino? Then she turns to the stands and says 4 words, Salamat, mga kababayan, thank you, my countrymen. She has also said plainly that she represents a minority. She knows exactly what she is standing in front of. So here is the answer to Jessica Pegula's question in one sentence. They did not come from anywhere. They were always here. Pegula did not watch a fan base appear that afternoon in Miami. She watched one become visible. And I want to know if any of this is your story, because a lot of you watching are the people in those stands, or you are 1 degree away from them. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from, or tell me if you have seen this happen in another sport with another community, because I think this pattern is bigger than tennis, and I want to know what you have seen. Now, that is a big claim, and big claims need evidence. So let me show you 3 things that prove it, starting with a comparison that happened at this exact tournament in the same week, on the same court, involving a player far more famous than Alex Eala. The cleanest proof happened 48 hours ago, on the same court in the same tournament. Naomi Osaka is also loved in Washington. She said so herself. Asked on court how much the support was helping her, she said the fans help her a lot, that the place feels like home to her, and she was grateful for it. That is real. She is a 4-time Grand Slam champion and a genuine global icon, and people in that stadium adore her. But watch the difference, because it is the whole argument. Analysts covering that semifinal pointed out something specific. The support for Osaka is general and appreciative, warm, widespread. What it is not is organized. There is no block of flag waving, chanting supporters mobilizing around Osaka's match schedule the way the D.C. area Filipino-American community mobilized around Eala's. That is the difference between fame and infrastructure. Fame is passive. People are pleased you are there. Infrastructure is mobilized. People rearrange their week around your order of play. And remember the ranking gap in that comparison. Osaka is a former world number 1 with 4 majors. Eala was the 29th ranked player in the world unseeded, playing that tournament for the first time in her life. Fame lost to infrastructure. On the same court, on the same night. Second piece of evidence. It repeats and it moves. Miami in 2025, Berlin in June, Wimbledon in July, Washington this week. 4 countries, 3 continents, 16 months. Same flag, same chant, same behavior, same umpire interventions. And the best evidence that it is growing comes from Pegula herself. Talking about it this week, she said she assumed the crowd in the final would be even more lopsided than Miami was. She said it has gotten crazier since then. And then she said the line that matters most, which is that, looking back on it now, it makes complete sense to her. That is somebody watching a system come into focus. In 2025, she thought she was seeing an anomaly. In 2026, she is describing it as obvious. Anomalies do not repeat in 4 countries and intensify. Systems do. Third piece of evidence. And this is the one that takes it out of the realm of atmosphere and puts it on the scoreboard. This crowd changes results. First round in Washington. Eala loses the opening set to Zheng Qinwen, the Olympic gold medalist, 4-6. Zheng is serving bombs, 14 aces to Eala's 4 across the match. On paper, it is over. Eala wins the next 2 sets 6-4 and 6-1. Second round. Leylah Fernandez, the defending champion of the tournament. Eala takes the first set 6-2, then goes down 1-5 in the second. Fernandez is serving for the set. Eala wins the tiebreak 7 points to 1. Both of those reversals happened at the exact moments the stadium was loudest. Philippine media documented it in real time, the crowd rallying her point by point, the chant going up while she was down. Now, I am not going to tell you crowd noise hits a forehand. It does not, but a 21-year-old, 3 hours into a match, on the other side of the world from home, should not have another gear available at 1-5 down. She keeps finding one, and she has said herself that the atmosphere makes it fun to be out there and makes her competitive. That is a measurable competitive asset that no other player ranked near her possesses. So now go back to the question Pegula asked in Miami. Where are these people coming from? They were in South Florida already. They were in Virginia and Maryland already. They were in West London and in Berlin and in Toronto, working, raising kids, living entire lives in cities that happened to host professional tennis tournaments. Nobody traveled, nobody was recruited. Tennis did not get discovered by them. They finally got discovered by tennis. And that resolves the last paradox too, the one about the silence rules, and I think this is the part that deserves more respect than it gets. Tennis etiquette is not a law of nature, it is a tradition. Specifically, it is the tradition of one particular spectator class, in one particular group of countries, developed over roughly a century, and then treated as though it were universal because everybody in the room agreed with it. This crowd is not being rude. This crowd is not uninformed. This crowd is a new audience arriving with its own spectator tradition intact, and applying it the way every new audience in the history of every sport has done. Football crowds sang before anybody decided that was correct. Basketball got loud because the people in the building decided it should be. Tennis is simply meeting a spectator culture it has never had to accommodate before and calling it a disturbance because it does not have a category for it yet. So the question is answered. But there is a consequence to all of this that almost nobody in tennis has said out loud yet, and it is the part that is going to change the tour's calendar. Here is the part nobody has said out loud. The chairman of the DC Open, Mark Ein, admitted that getting Alex Eala to Washington was a deliberate, concerted effort. Read that again. An American tournament spent time and resources actively recruiting the 29th ranked player in the world. Nobody does that for a ranking. Nobody builds a recruitment strategy around a player with 0 titles because of her forehand. They did it for the stands. And it paid for itself inside 48 hours. Sold-out sessions. The loudest crowd on the grounds before she had beaten anybody. A tournament that had been running for over half a century suddenly had a section of the stadium that looked and sounded like nothing in its history. That is the answer to the question, delivered in the only language professional sports actually speaks. So let me close the loop properly. Where did these people come from? Nowhere. They were already here. For 60 years, they were already here, in Virginia and Maryland and South Florida and West London, and the only thing that changed is that somebody finally gave them a name to point at. That is it. That is the whole mystery. The crowd did not follow Alex Eala. Alex Eala walked into a crowd that had been waiting, without anywhere to put it, for longer than she has been alive. And right now, that crowd has taken her further than anyone predicted. Her live ranking sits at number 24, a career high with 1,931 points. If she wins the final, she cracks the top 20 for the first time. The final is against Jessica Pegula. The woman who asked the question, world number 3, top seed, standing on the other side of the net, walking into a stadium she has already told us will be louder than Miami was. She said this week that she expects it to be worse for her than it was back then. She also said Eala is the future of the tour and that she is already here. The person who was confused in 2025 is now the last obstacle in 2026. You could not write it cleaner. But the thing I keep thinking about is bigger than one match. The WTA has just discovered it owns an unserved market of over 100 million people at home, plus a diaspora already installed in nearly every city where it stages tournaments. That entire door is currently being held open by one 21-year-old with a suitcase and a two-handed backhand. Tournaments are going to chase this. Sponsors are going to chase this. A tour stop in Manila stopped being a fantasy the moment Rock Creek Park sold out. So the question is not where these people came from anymore. We know they were always here. The question now is what happens to this sport when Alex Eala actually wins something. Follow the channel because we find out on Sunday and we are covering it the second it ends.